Commander Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of the UES horizon watching the stars drift past the viewscreen like distant diamonds scattered across black velvet. The year was 2387 and humanity had been exploring the galaxy alongside other alien races for almost 200 years now. Jake had spent most of his adult life among the stars, but the beauty of deepless space never got old. The Horizon was on a routine mapping mission in the Kepler sector, scanning for new planets and checking old star charts for errors. It was boring work, but someone had to do it. The crew of 43 humans worked alongside 12 alien specialists from various coalition species. They had been out here for 6 months already, with 3 more to go. "Commander, we have something strange on." The sensors called out Lieutenant Chris Parker from his station. The young navigator had been with Jake for 2 years and rarely got excited about anything. Jake walked over to look at the readings. "What am I looking at, Chris?" "Unknown vessel, sir, about 2 million kilometers off our starboard bow. It doesn't match anything in our database, and it's not responding to hails." Dr. Lisa Carter looked up from her research station where she had been studying rock samples from their last planetary survey. As the ship's xenoarchaeologist, she was always interested in anything old or mysterious. "Can we get a visual?" The main screen shifted to show a strange ship drifting in the void between stars. It was unlike anything any of them had ever seen. The hull seemed to shimmer with its own light, and the design was all flowing curves instead of the sharp angles most species preferred. It looked more grown than built. "Life signs?" Jake asked. "None that I can detect, sir," replied Ensign Maya Brooks from the science station, "but there's definitely power running through that thing. The energy readings are off the charts." Chief Engineer Ryan Blake whistled low as he studied the technical read. "Boss, I've never seen anything like this. The power source isn't fusion or antimatter or anything we recognize. It's like the whole ship is one big energy field." Jake made his decision quickly. "Prep a shuttle." "Dr. Carter, you're with me." "Ryan, I want you there too, in case we need to interface with their systems." "Chris, you have the bridge." An hour later, Jake found himself floating in zero gravity inside the alien vessel. Their shuttle had docked easily with what seemed to be an airlock, though it had opened for them without any commands. The interior was even stranger than the outside. The corridors were lined with crystalline structures that pulsed with soft blue light. The walls seemed organic, almost alive, and they curved in ways that made no sense from an engineering standpoint. But the most unsettling thing was how the crystals seemed to react to their presence growing brighter when they approached. "This is incredible," Lisa whispered as she ran her scanner over one of the larger crystal formations. "These aren't just decorative. They're some kind of technology, but I can't figure out what they're supposed to do." Ryan had found what looked like a control panel or maybe an altar. It was hard to tell with alien tech sometimes. "I'm going to try interfacing with their systems. Maybe we can find out who built this thing and where they went." "Be careful," Jake warned, but Ryan was already reaching out to touch the smooth crystal surface. The moment Ryan's gloved hand made contact, everything changed. The crystals blazed with brilliant light, and suddenly the air around them filled with images. Not holograms exactly, but something more real than that. Jake watched in amazement as scenes from Ryan's childhood played out in front of them like they were actually happening. There was 5-year-old Ryan building sandcastles on a beach, 10-year-old Ryan reading adventure stories under his blankets with a flashlight, teenage Ryan dreaming about flying among the stars. The images were so vivid, Jake could smell the salt air and hear the sound of waves. "Ryan, what's happening?" Lisa asked, but her voice sounded far away. "I don't know," Ryan said, and his voice was full of wonder. "It's reading my mind, but not just my thoughts. It's pulling up memories I'd forgotten. Dreams I had as a kid." More images flashed around them. Ryan's grandmother telling him stories about brave knights and magical kingdoms. His first time seeing a real spaceship. The day he decided to become an engineer so he could help explore the galaxy. Jake tried to reach for Ryan to pull him away from the crystal, but the moment he touched his friend's shoulder, he was pulled into the experience too. Suddenly, his own memories were mixing with Ryan's in the swirling light show around them. "My God," Lisa breathed. "It's not just reading our minds. It's manifesting our imagination." As if responding to her words, the images began to change. Instead of just memories, they were seeing things that had never happened. Fantastic space battles with weapons made of pure light. Cities that floated among the clouds. Creatures that existed only in dreams and stories. "We need to document this," Lisa said, pulling out her recorder. "This technology could change everything we know about the universe." Jake finally managed to break the connection by grabbing Ryan's hand and pulling it away from the crystal. The images faded slowly like smoke dispersing in the wind. The three of them stood there breathing hard and trying to process what they had just experienced. What kind of species could build something like this? Ryan asked. Lisa was already scanning the crystals again, her scientific mind racing. One that understood imagination as a fundamental force of the universe. This isn't just technology. It's something far more powerful and far more dangerous. Jake looked around at the pulsing crystals with new respect and a growing sense of unease. They had stumbled onto something that could be humanity's greatest discovery or their greatest threat. He had a feeling their routine mapping mission had just become anything but routine. 3 days later, Jake Morrison stood in the main briefing room of New Geneva Station, watching the most important people in the galaxy argue about what his crew had discovered. Admiral Patricia Wells sat at the head of the long table, her weathered face showing the strain of command. Around her were representatives from dozens of alien species, all talking at once in their various languages. The Horizon had returned to Coalition headquarters as fast as their engines could carry them. The strange alien vessel was now secured in a special hangar surrounded by the best scientists and security teams the Coalition could provide. But nobody seemed to know what to do with it. The technology is beyond anything we've encountered, Dr. Lisa Carter was saying as she stood before the assembled delegates. The crystals don't just read thoughts or memories, they can actually manifest imagination into physical reality. Representative Zethkar of the Altarian Assembly raised one of his forearms. The tall blue-skinned alien was over 300 years old and served as the Coalition's chief historian. When he spoke, his translated voice carried the weight of centuries. Dr. Carter, what you describe sounds very much like the legends of the Vorthok, he said slowly. Though I had hoped those were just stories told to frighten children. Admiral Wells leaned forward. Tell us about these Vorthoks. Zethkar's large black eyes seemed to look into the distant past. They were an ancient race that ruled much of the galaxy long before any of our current civilizations achieved space flight. The legends say they possessed the power to transform thought into matter and dreams into weapons. They conquered entire star systems, not through superior technology, but through the sheer force of their imagination. A chill ran through the room. Dr. Carter felt her stomach drop as the implications became clear. What happened to them? They vanished, Zethkar replied. Almost overnight, according to the historical records. One day they controlled half the known galaxy, and the next day they were simply gone. They left behind only ruins and warnings carved in languages so old we can barely translate them. What kind of warnings? Jake asked. The Altarian's skin darkened, which was a sign of deep concern among his people. The power that reshapes reality will ultimately reshape the wielder. Those who dream of godhood will find that gods make poor mortals. Representative Krex of the Saurian hegemony spoke up next. The reptilian alien's voice was harsh and guttural, even through the translation device. Why are we discussing ancient legends when we should be studying this technology for ourselves? If these crystals can truly manifest imagination, then they could solve every problem the Coalition faces. Several other delegates murmured agreement, but Admiral Wells held up her hand for silence. Dr. Carter, has there been any progress in understanding how the crystals actually work? Lisa nodded and activated the holographic display in the center of the table. We've run hundreds of tests over the past 3 days. The crystals seem to respond most strongly to human brain patterns. Other species can activate them, but the effects are much weaker and more predictable. Predictable how? Asked Ambassador Lysis of the Ethereal Collective, the floating energy being pulsed with curious colors. When Zethkar touched one of the crystals yesterday, it produced exactly what he was thinking about, a simple mathematical equation rendered in light. But when Sergeant Amy Foster from our security team made contact, the results were far more dramatic. The hologram showed a recording of the test. Amy Foster was a Marine with bright red hair and a reputation for fearlessness. When she touched the crystal, the air around her had filled with fantastic imagery. Dragons made of starfire breathing cosmic flame, swords that could cut through the fabric of space itself, armor that shimmered like liquid mercury. The human imagination appears to be fundamentally different from other species, Lisa continued. Where most sentient beings think in logical patterns, humans dream in chaos. Your minds follow predictable paths, but human creativity is wild and unlimited. Representative Voss of the Machine Collective spoke in his mechanical voice. This chaos you describe sounds dangerous. How can such unpredictable power be controlled? That's just it, Lisa said. I don't think it can be controlled in any traditional sense. Human imagination doesn't follow rules or logic. It creates new possibilities that shouldn't exist. According to normal physics, Admiral Wells stood up and began pacing. She had been a soldier for 40 years, and her instincts were telling her that something big was coming. Dr. Carter, I want you to continue your research, but with maximum security protocols. Nobody touches those crystals without my direct authorization. Admiral, with respect, interrupted Dr. Elena Rodriguez, who had been silent until now. The theoretical physicist was part of the research team studying the alien vessel. We've only scratched the surface of what this technology can do. If we're too cautious, we might miss something crucial, and if we're too reckless, we might unleash something we can't control, Wells replied sharply. The Vorthok had this power, and look what happened to them. Zethkar spoke again, his voice heavy. With ancient wisdom, Admiral Wells is wise to be cautious. The old records speak of Vorthok who became lost in their own creations. They grew so powerful that they could no longer distinguish between what was real and what they had imagined into existence. Jake felt a chill run down his spine. What you're saying is that this power could drive someone insane, worse than insane. The Altarian replied. The Vorthok became addicted to their own godlike abilities. They began reshaping reality on a whim, caring nothing for the consequences. Eventually they destroyed themselves when their competing visions of reality began to tear the universe apart. The briefing room fell silent as everyone absorbed this information. Finally, Admiral Wells spoke again. I'm ordering the research to continue, but under strict controls. No human personnel are to interact with the crystals without full medical monitoring and psychological evaluation. Admiral Dr. Rodriguez said urgently, I understand your concerns, but we may not have the luxury of taking this slowly. My long-range sensors have been picking up some disturbing readings from beyond the galactic rim. What kind of readings? Wells asked. Elena's face was pale as she activated her own holographic display. Massive energy signatures moving toward our galaxy. The patterns don't match any known technology, but the power levels are off the charts. Whatever is coming our way, it's big, and it's heading straight for Coalition Space Representative Krex hissed in alarm. How long do we have based on their current trajectory? I estimate 6 months before they reach the outer colonies, Alina replied. Admiral Wells felt the weight of command settling on her shoulders like a heavy cloak. Ladies and gentlemen, it seems we may need to learn how to use this Vorthok technology whether we want to or not. If something is coming that could threaten the entire coalition, then humanity's imagination might be our only hope. Jake looked around the room at the worried faces of the galaxy's leaders. 3 days ago he had been on a routine mapping mission, and now he was sitting in the middle of what could be the most important moment in galactic history. The ancient Vorthok had possessed the power to reshape reality itself, and somehow that power had fallen into human hands just when the galaxy needed it most. He wondered if that was a coincidence, or if the universe had a sense of timing that mortals couldn't understand. Captain Scott Murphy gripped the armrests of his command chair as another massive energy blast rocked his ship. The EU's Defiance was the newest and most powerful vessel in the Coalition fleet, but against these enemies it felt like a toy boat in a hurricane. Around him, his bridge crew worked frantically at their stations, trying to coordinate the defense of the Tau Ceti colony. Damage reports, Scott called out over the sound of alarms. Hull breach on Deck 7, replied his first officer, Lieutenant Kelly Davis. Emergency force fields are holding, but we've lost 2 torpedo launchers and the port shield. Generator is failing. Scott watched the tactical display with growing desperation. 3 weeks ago, long-range sensors had detected the approaching energy signatures that Dr. Rodriguez had warned about. The Coalition had scrambled every available ship to the outer rim, hoping to intercept whatever was coming before it could reach the populated systems. But what they found was worse than anyone had imagined. Enemies called themselves the Devourers, though they rarely bothered to communicate at all. They were beings of pure energy and malevolent intelligence that existed partially outside normal space and time. Where they passed, entire star systems simply ceased to exist, leaving behind only empty void that hurt to look at. Sir, we're receiving a distress call from the colony, reported Ensign Peter Collins from the communications station. They're saying the creatures are phasing through the planetary shields like they're not even there. Scott felt his heart sink. The Tau Ceti colony was home to over 2 million beings from dozens of different species. If the Devourers reached the surface, there would be nothing left but cosmic dust. All ships concentrate fire on the lead entity, he ordered through the fleet communication system. We have to buy the evacuation ships more time. The Coalition fleet opened fire with everything they had. Plasma cannons, antimatter torpedoes, and particle beams lit up the darkness of space. but the energy weapons passed right through the Devourers like they were firing at shadows. The physical projectiles hit their targets but seemed to cause no damage at all. "It's no use," Sir Kelly said quietly. "Our weapons can't even touch them." Scott was about to order a retreat when something impossible happened. One of the smaller Devourer entities suddenly stopped moving and began writhing in what looked like pain. A strange net of golden light had appeared around it, holding it in place like a cosmic spiderweb. "What the hell is that?" Scott demanded. "Unknown," sir, replied the sensor operator. "The energy signature is coming from the UES Explorer. It's one of the research vessels on the Explorer's bridge." Navigator Peter Collins stared at his hands in amazement. He had been thinking about his 8-year-old daughter back on Earth and how she loved fairy tales about magical nets that could catch anything. When the Devourer had attacked his ship, he had desperately wished for something that could stop it. Somehow, that wish had become real. Dr. Elena Rodriguez, who was aboard the Explorer as part of the research team, quickly ran to Peter's station. "How did you do that?" "I don't know," Peter said, still staring at the golden net that held the writhing Devourer. "I was just thinking about my daughter's favorite story, and suddenly this thing appeared." Elena's mind raced as she made the connection. "The Vorthok crystals. We brought some aboard for testing. Your imagination must have activated them." The golden net was already beginning to fade and the trapped Devourer was breaking free, but for a few precious seconds it had been completely helpless. Elena realized they had just discovered something that could change everything. "All ships, this is Dr. Rodriguez," she called over the emergency channel. "I need every human in the fleet to focus their imagination on creating weapons or barriers. Don't think logically, just dream up whatever feels right." "Doctor, what are you talking about?" came Scott's confused reply. "Trust me, Captain. Human imagination might be the only thing that can hurt these creatures across the fleet." Human crew members began concentrating on their wildest dreams and fantasies. Sergeant Dan Carter aboard the UC's Vigilant imagined walls of crystallized music that could block energy attacks. The barriers shimmered into existence just in time to protect his ship from a Devourer's assault. Lieutenant Maya Brooks on the flagship UAS Sovereign dreamed up a squadron of ghostly fighters that swooped and danced around the enemy entities. The phantom ships couldn't be destroyed because they weren't really there, but their imaginary weapons seemed to cause real pain to the DEVOURERS. Engineer Lisa Stone aboard the transport ship New Hope visualized rescue pods made of compressed starlight that could phase through the Devourer's attacks to reach trapped civilians. The pods appeared and began ferrying people to safety faster than any conventional shuttle could manage. The Devourers seemed confused and frightened by these impossible attacks. They were beings of pure logic and order who understood reality. In absolute terms, the chaotic creativity of human imagination was like a disease that infected their perfect understanding of how the universe should work. "It's working," Scott called out in amazement as he watched the lead Devourer retreat from a barrage of dream weapons. "Whatever you're doing, keep it up," but the victory was temporary. The Devourers quickly adapted to the new threat by simply avoiding the human-created constructs. They began targeting the coalition ships with surgical precision, trying to eliminate the humans who were causing them so much trouble. "Sir, we're losing too many vessels," Kelly reported. "The Devourers are learning to counter our attacks." Elena knew they needed something bigger, something that could affect all the enemies at once. She closed her eyes and tried to imagine the star at the center of the system, not as a simple ball of nuclear fire, but as something far more powerful. In her mind's eye, the star became the physical embodiment of hope itself, a beacon that could never be extinguished as long as thinking beings believed in tomorrow. The star began to pulse with new energy that made the Devourers shriek in frequencies that hurt to hear. They fled from the system like moths fleeing from a flame, leaving behind only confused and grateful survivors. Dr. Rodriguez opened her eyes to find the bridge crew staring at her in awe. "Did I do that?" "I think we all did," Peter said quietly. Every human in the fleet was thinking the same thing at the same moment. Captain Murphy's voice came over the communication system, filled with wonder and concern. "Dr. Rodriguez, what just happened here?" Elena looked out at the star that still pulsed with impossible light. "I think we just learned why the Vorthok disappeared, Captain. This power we've discovered, it's intoxicating. For a moment there I felt like I could reshape the entire universe just by wanting it badly enough." The implications were terrifying. Humanity had found a weapon that could drive back the Devourers, but using it meant risking the same fate that had befallen the ancient Vorthok. They had won this battle, but Elena wondered if they were already losing the war for their own souls. On Tau Ceti colony, the survivors looked up at their sun that now shone with colors that had no names and wondered what their human protectors were becoming. Lieutenant Maya Brooks floated in the zero-gravity chamber deep within the asteroid mining facility that had been hastily converted into humanity's most secret training ground. Around her, the Vorthok crystals pulsed with soft blue light waiting for her to make contact and unleash whatever her imagination could create. It had been 2 months since the Battle of Tau Ceti, and the Coalition was still trying to understand what had happened there. Admiral Wells had immediately authorized Project Dreamweaver, a classified program to train humans in weaponizing their imagination through the alien crystal technology. The training facility hidden in the Ceres asteroid belt had become the most important military installation in the galaxy. "Remember," Maya said Dr. Lisa Carter through the intercom. "Don't force it. Let your mind wander naturally and see what emerges." Maya took a deep breath and placed her palms against the largest crystal. Immediately, her consciousness expanded into a realm where thought became reality. She found herself standing on the bridge of a massive starship that existed only in her imagination. Around her, she could see other vessels materializing as her mind conjured an entire fleet from pure creative energy. "Incredible," whispered Dr. Elena Rodriguez from the observation deck. "She's creating constructs that are registering as solid matter on our sensors. They're not permanent, but they're real enough to fight with." The training program had started with 20 volunteers from various coalition ships. All were humans who had shown strong creative tendencies and psychological stability. Maya had proven to be one of the most gifted, displaying an ability to imagine complex scenarios that manifested with startling detail and power. Corporal Dan Carter was in the next chamber over, practicing a very different skill. Where Maya created vast fleets, Dan specialized in defensive constructs. As he touched his assigned crystal, the space around him filled with maze-like distortions that bent light and gravity in impossible ways. "Excellent work, Dan," came the voice of Captain Jake Morrison, who had been assigned to oversee the combat applications of the program. Those spatial distortions would confuse any conventional navigation system, but not everyone was celebrating the program's success. In the main conference room, Admiral Wells was meeting with representatives from several coalition species who were growing increasingly nervous about humanity's new abilities. "Admiral, this is madness," said Representative Krex of the Saurian hegemony. His reptilian features were twisted with concern. "You're training humans to become gods. What happens when they decide they don't need the rest of us anymore?" Wells had been expecting this conversation. "The humans in this program undergo constant psychological evaluation. We have safeguards in place." "Safeguards?" scoffed Ambassador This of the Ethereal Collective, the energy being pulsed with agitated colors. The Vorthok thought they had safeguards, too. "Look how that ended." The meeting was interrupted by an urgent communication from the Outer Rim. Captain Scott Murphy appeared on the holographic display, his face grim with bad news. "Admiral, the Devourers have struck again. They hit the mining colony at Wolf 359 before our fleet could respond. 3 million people dead in less than an hour." Wells felt her stomach clench. Despite their victory at Tau Ceti, the Devourers had continued their advance into coalition space. They had learned from their first encounter with human imagination and were now striking quickly before the defense fleets could respond. "How many more attacks?" "Captain's 17 colonies hit in the last week," Scott replied. "They're moving faster now and hitting multiple targets simultaneously." "Admiral, we need more imagination wielders, and we need them soon." Representative Zeth of the Altarian Assembly spoke up from his seat at the conference table. "Admiral Wells, perhaps it is time to expand the program beyond volunteers. The galaxy is dying while we debate ethics." Wells turned to Dr. Carter, who had just entered the room. "Doctor, how many humans are currently qualified for crystal interface training?" "We've identified approximately 2,000 individuals with the right psychological profiles," Lisa replied. "But Admiral, I have to warn you that we're seeing some disturbing side effects in our current trainees." "What kind of side effects?" Lisa activated a holographic display showing brain scans and psychological evaluations. "Extended use of the crystals seems to create a form of addiction. The trainees report that normal reality feels flat and colorless compared to the realm of pure imagination. Several have requested to remain connected to the crystals permanently." Dr. Rodriguez nodded grimly. "We've also noticed that the more powerful constructs require multiple humans working together, but when they link their imaginations through the crystals, they sometimes have trouble maintaining individual identity." "Are you saying the crystals are dangerous?" "I'm saying they're exactly as dangerous as the Vorthok record suggested," Lisa replied. Every session we run increases the risk that our volunteers will lose themselves in their own creations. Admiral Wells stared at the tactical display showing Devourer movements across Coalition space. Red markers indicated dead worlds, while yellow ones showed colonies under immediate threat. The mathematics were simple and brutal. At their current rate of advance, the Devourers would reach the core worlds within 6 months. "We don't have a choice," she said finally. "Begin Phase 2 of the program. Want 500 new trainees within the month." Over the following weeks, the asteroid facility expanded rapidly as new volunteers arrived from across human space. Engineers worked around the clock to install more crystal chambers, while psychologists developed new training protocols to minimize the risk of mental dissolution. Among the new arrivals was Ensign Chris Parker, who had volunteered despite having no previous combat experience. His specialty turned out to be creating navigational hazards that could trap enemy vessels in pocket dimensions that existed only as long as he maintained concentration. Specialist Rachel Stone discovered she could imagine weapons that fired concentrated emotions. Her anger became bolts of crimson lightning, while her compassion manifested as healing energy that could repair both ships and souls. But the most disturbing case was Lieutenant Brooks, who had been one of the original volunteers. After weeks of training, she had become so proficient at manifesting imaginary fleets that she sometimes forgot which ships were real and which were products of her mind. "Maya, you need to take a break," Dr. Carter said gently as she found the young officer sitting in the crystal chamber long after her training session had ended. "But Doctor, the Devourers could attack at any moment," Maya replied without opening her eyes. "Out there in the realm of pure imagination, I can see them coming. I can prepare defenses that will keep everyone safe, Maya. That realm isn't real. You need to remember that." For the first time in hours, Maya opened her eyes and looked at Lisa with an expression that was both sad and frighteningly serene. "How can you be sure, Doctor? When I'm connected to the crystals, I can reshape reality itself. Maybe this mundane universe is the illusion and imagination is the only truth." Lisa felt a chill run down her spine as she realized they might already be too late to save some of their volunteers from the same fate that had claimed the vortex. The power to remake reality was seductive beyond measure, and human beings had never been good at resisting temptation. As reports continued to arrive of Devourer attacks across the galaxy, the leaders of Project Dreamweaver faced a terrible choice. They could expand the program and risk creating a new generation of reality-addicted humans, who might eventually threaten the universe itself. Or they could maintain their caution and watch helplessly as the Devourers consumed everything they had sworn to protect. Time was running out, and the weight of an entire galaxy's survival rested on the imagination of a species that had always dreamed of being more than mortal. Admiral Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of the UES Infinity watching the largest gathering of enemy forces anyone had ever seen. The Devourer fleet stretched across space like a malignant cancer, with hundreds of the reality-eating entities converging on the Centauri system, home to over 12 billion Coalition citizens across 4 worlds. Centauri was the heart of galactic civilization. If it fell, the war would be over. "Admiral, all human imagination wielders are in position," reported Captain Kelly Davis from her station. "We have 47 volunteers connected to crystal arrays throughout the fleet." Jake nodded grimly. 4 months of intensive training had produced the most powerful group of imagination wielders humanity had ever assembled. But the cost had been terrible. 12 volunteers had been permanently lost to crystal addiction, becoming catatonic as their minds retreated completely into realms of pure fantasy. Others showed signs of developing god complexes, believing they were destined to reshape the universe according to their personal vision. "Dr. Rodriguez, what's the status of our primary weapon?" Alina looked up from her console where she had been monitoring the massive crystal array installed in the Infinity's core. "The Starfire protocol is ready, Admiral. All 47 wielders are linked through the crystal network. When activated, they'll combine their imagination into a single unified construct, and the risks." Elena's face was pale. "Unknown, sir. We've never attempted anything on this scale before. The psychological stress could kill them, or worse, drive them completely insane." The Devourers were already beginning their assault on the outer planets. Centauri, for a mining world with 3 million inhabitants, simply vanished as a massive entity passed through it. Where the planet had been, there was now only empty space that hurt to look at. "All ships prepare for engagement," Jake ordered through the fleet communication system. "Remember, our job is to buy time for the evacuation ships. We don't need to destroy them, just drive them back long enough for the civilians to escape." Ensign Chris Parker was in Crystal Chamber 7, his consciousness linked with the other imagination wielders throughout the fleet. Around him he could feel the creative energy of dozens of human minds, all focused on a single, desperate goal. His specialty in creating navigational hazards merged with Maya Brooks's fleet manifestation abilities and Don Carter's defensive constructs. I can see them, Maya's voice whispered through the psychic link. They're not just destroying reality, they're consuming it, making it part of themselves. Specialist Rachel Stone added her emotional weapons to the growing construct. They feed on order and logic. Human chaos confuses them, makes them vulnerable. The battle began when the Devourers reached Centauri 3. The Coalition fleet opened fire with conventional weapons, knowing they would be useless but hoping to distract the entities long enough for the imagination wielders to complete their work. Lieutenant Brooks began manifesting an entire fleet of ghost ships that swooped and danced around the Devourers. The phantom vessels couldn't be destroyed because they weren't entirely real, but they're impossible. Maneuvers and dream-based weapons caused visible distress to the reality-eating entities. Corporal Carter created maze-like distortions in space, time that trapped several smaller devourers in pocket dimensions where up was down and cause followed effect in reverse order. The entities writhed in confusion as their perfect understanding of reality was challenged by human illogic, but the enemy adapted quickly. The larger devourers began working together to create zones of absolute order that dissolved human constructs on contact. Where their influence spread, imagination itself became impossible as the universe was forced back into rigid mathematical certainty. We're losing coherence, Dan reported through the crystal link. They're creating reality anchors that prevent our constructs from forming. Jake watched in horror as one of the Devourers reached Centauri 2 and began the process of consuming the planet and its 2 billion inhabitants. The evacuation ships were still loading civilians and wouldn't be clear for another hour. Dr. Rodriguez, activate the Starfire protocol, sir. The risks, do it now. Elena initiated the crystal network link that connected every human imagination wielder in the fleet. Suddenly 47 minds became one vast creative consciousness that spanned multiple ships and thousands of kilometers of space. Chris felt his individual identity dissolving as he became part of something much larger. He was no longer just Chris Parker, but a fragment of humanity's collective dream. Around him he sensed Maya's talent for fleet creation, Dan's defensive abilities, Rachel's emotional weapons, and dozens of other gifts all merging into a single unified force. Together they imagined the impossible. The star at the center of Centauri system began to change. Instead of a simple ball of nuclear fire, it became something far more fundamental. In the linked imagination of 47 humans, the star transformed into the physical embodiment of hope itself. A beacon that could never be extinguished as long as thinking beings believed in tomorrow. The Devourers shrieked in frequencies that existed beyond normal hearing as the star pulsed with energy that violated their understanding of how reality should work. They were beings of pure logic and order, but hope was chaotic, unpredictable, and utterly beyond their comprehension. It's working, Kelly called out in amazement. The Devourers are retreating from the inner system, but the effort was taking a terrible toll on the human wielders. Several lost consciousness as their minds struggled to process the vastness of what they had created. Others began speaking in languages that didn't exist, describing colors that had no names. Admiral, I'm losing contact with Crystal Chamber 12, Alina reported urgently. Lieutenant Brooks isn't responding to any stimuli. Jake felt his heart sink as he realized what was happening. Maya had pushed her abilities too far and become lost in her own creation. Her mind was trapped somewhere between reality and imagination, unable to find its way back to the mundane universe. Dr. Rodriguez, can we break the link? Not without destroying the construct, Alina replied. If we sever the connection now, the star will revert to normal and the Devourers will resume their attack. The choice was agonizing. They could maintain the unified imagination that was driving back the Devourers, but it meant sacrificing the minds of the volunteers who were too deeply connected to the crystal network. Or they could save their people and watch 12 billion civilians die as the reality eaters consumed the Centauri system. Jake closed his eyes and made the hardest decision of his life. Maintain the link. Those volunteers knew the risks. When they signed up for 6 more hours, the battle raged across multiple dimensions of reality and imagination. The Devourers threw everything they had against the transformed star, but it continued to pulse with impossible hope. Finally accepting defeat, they began withdrawing toward the galactic rim, leaving behind a system forever changed by human dreams. When the crystal links were finally severed, 8 volunteers, including Maya Brooks, remained catatonic. Their bodies were alive, but their minds were lost somewhere in the vast realm of pure imagination that they had helped create. Jake stood in the medical bay looking down at Maya's still form and wondered if they had won a victory or simply found a new way to lose their humanity. The Devourers were retreating, but at what cost? How many more battles like this could they fight before there were no humans left to dream at all? Outside the medical bay windows, the star of Centauri continued to shine with colors that had no names, serving as a monument to both human creativity and the terrible price of wielding the power of gods. Dr. Lisa Carter stood in the main hall of the Institute of Controlled Imagination, watching a new class of students learn to harness humanity's greatest gift without losing their minds in the process. 6 months had passed since the Battle of Centauri, and the galaxy was still adjusting to the new reality where human dreams could literally reshape the universe. The Institute had been built on Earth in the mountains of Colorado, far from major population centers in case something went wrong. Its clean white corridors and carefully designed meditation chambers represented humanity's attempt to learn from the mistakes of the ancient Vorthok. Remember the first rule, Lisa called out to the dozen young volunteers practicing with small crystal fragments. Imagination without wisdom is destruction without purpose. You are not gods, you are guardians. Among the students was Ensign Kelly Davis, who had requested transfer from Fleet Command to learn these new abilities. Her natural caution and strong sense of responsibility made her an ideal candidate for the program. As she touched her practice crystal, she carefully imagined a simple flower made of crystallized light. The construct appeared for exactly 10 seconds before fading away as planned. Excellent control, Kelly said. Dr. Elena Rodriguez from her position as senior instructor. You maintained perfect focus without letting the power intoxicate you. Institute's protocols were strict and had been developed through painful trial and error. No student was allowed to use the crystals for more than 30 minutes at a time. All sessions were monitored by teams of psychologists and neuroscientists. Most importantly, every imagination wielder worked in pairs to keep each other grounded in mundane reality. Admiral Patricia Wells entered the hall accompanied by Representative Zethkar of the Altarian Assembly. The old alien had become a strong supporter of the program once he saw the safeguards that had been implemented. Dr. Carter, how are our students progressing? Wells asked. Better than expected, Admiral. The buddy system has eliminated the addiction problems we saw in the early volunteers. When someone starts to lose themselves in the crystal realm, their partner can pull them back to reality. Zethkar's large black eyes studied the practicing students with ancient wisdom. The Vorthok had no such protocols. They viewed imagination as a solitary pursuit and paid the price for their arrogance. In another part of the facility, former Admiral Jake Morrison worked with the Combat Applications Division. The title of his position was Director of Strategic Imagination, and he took his responsibilities seriously. The Devourers had retreated to the Galactic Rim, but intelligence reports suggested they were regrouping for another assault. The key is restraint, Jake explained to a group of military imagination wielders. We don't want to create permanent changes to reality. Our constructs should be temporary solutions to immediate problems. Corporal Dan Carter, who had survived the Battle of Centauri with his sanity intact, raised his hand. Sir, what about emergency situations? What if restraint means people die then? We accept that cost, Jake replied grimly. The moment we start believing that any goal justifies unlimited use of imagination, we become the next Vorthok. Better to lose battles than lose our humanity. The philosophy was controversial but necessary. Several coalition species had requested access to Vorthok crystal technology, but the Institute's governing board had refused. Human imagination was chaotic and unpredictable. Enough without adding alien thought patterns to the mix. In the medical wing, Dr. Rodriguez worked with the volunteers who had been lost during the Battle of Centauri. Lieutenant Maya Brooks remained catatonic, but her brain scans showed unusual activity. She was conscious somewhere in the realm of pure imagination, but unable or unwilling to return to baseline reality. Maya, can you hear me? Elena asked gently as she adjusted the monitoring equipment. We need you to come back to us for just a moment. Maya's eyes seemed to focus on Elena's face. When she spoke, her voice was filled with wonder and sadness. I can see everything that could be, all the possible futures spreading out like branches on an infinite tree. How can I choose just one reality when I can have them all? Because choice is what makes us human, Elena replied. The Vorthok forgot that and lost themselves in endless possibility. Maya's eyes drifted closed again, but Elena thought she saw a flicker of understanding. The recovery process would be long and difficult, but there was hope. Captain Scott Murphy arrived at the Institute carrying urgent news from the Outer Rim. The Devourers had been spotted massing near the edge of known space, apparently preparing for another assault on Coalition territory. Admiral Wells, we need to deploy imagination wielders to the frontier, he reported. Our conventional forces can't stop them if they attack in full strength. Wells nodded, but her expression was cautious. How many wielders are ready for combat? Deployment 37 have completed the full training program, Lisa replied. They're skilled, disciplined, and most importantly, they understand the dangers of unlimited power. Representative Krex of the Saurian hegemony spoke up from his seat on the governing board. 37 seems insufficient to defend the entire galaxy. Quality over quantity, Zethkar said firmly. The Vorthok had thousands of reality manipulators, but they destroyed themselves through lack of wisdom. These humans have learned restraint. Jake stepped forward with a proposal he had been developing for weeks. Admiral, I recommend we establish a joint exploration mission to investigate reports of other reality manipulation technologies in distant galaxies. If we're going to be guardians of this power, we need to understand its full scope, explained Long. Range sensors have detected energy signatures similar to Vorthok crystals in the Andromeda galaxy. If there are other species out there with imagination-based abilities, we need to make contact before the Devourers find them. Wells considered the proposal carefully. The Institute had proven that humans could wield reality-shaping power responsibly, but the temptation would always be there. Perhaps working with other species who faced similar challenges would help humanity stay on the right path. Very well, prepare the UES Infinity for an extended exploration mission. Dr. Carter, I want you to lead the research team 3 months later. Captain Kelly Davis stood on the bridge of the newly commissioned exploration vessel watching stars drift past that no human had ever seen before. The joint human-alien crew represented the best of coalition, cooperation with each species contributing their unique strengths to the mission. In the crystal chamber, Dr. Carter worked with a young volunteer named Peter Collins who had shown remarkable stability and creativity. As they touched the Vorthok crystal together, their combined imagination reached out across the vast distances between galaxies, searching for signs of other reality shapers. I can sense something, Peter whispered. Other minds that dream like we do, but with different patterns. They're scared and alone. Lisa felt it too. Somewhere in the darkness between galaxies were species who had discovered the power of imagination but lacked the wisdom to use it safely. They needed guidance teachers who could show them how to balance creativity with responsibility. Set course for the Andromeda galaxy, Kelly ordered. It's time to see if we can help others avoid the fate of the Vorthok. As the Infinity jumped to faster-than-light speed, Lisa reflected on humanity's journey from a small blue planet to guardians of reality itself. They had dreamed of reaching the stars, and the stars had given them the power to reshape existence. Now they carried the responsibility to use that gift wisely and to help others do the same. The human imagination had indeed become the galaxy's greatest weapon, but more than that, it had become its greatest hope. In a universe where order and chaos were constantly at war, the chaotic creativity of human dreams offered a third path. Not the rigid perfection that the Devourers sought, nor the unlimited power that had destroyed the Vorthok, but something far more precious, the ability to imagine a better tomorrow and the wisdom to work toward it one careful step at a time. Behind them, the Milky Way continued to spin through space, protected by those who had learned that the greatest power was knowing when not to use it, and ahead lay infinite possibilities waiting to be explored by minds that dreamed not of conquest but of connection across the vast loneliness of space.